Have you ever felt so sure about something? A life-changing realization, a new health practice, or a parenting approach that you just had to share it with everyone? We all have these convictions, right? We believe that are helpful and even essential for others. But what happens when that desire to help crosses the line into something that feels like imposition? In the world of social work, community care, and helping professionals, there's a tightrope we have to walk. How do we share what we believe is true and good without forcing our perspective on others? It's a delicate balance. And we live in a culture that frowns on imposing our beliefs, yet we also hold convictions we feel others need to hear. This tension isn't limited to one area. For some, it's about sharing a spiritual or religious truth. For others, it's about a particular philosophy or method that feels like a gospel of its own. Today, we're wrestling with this very question. What does it mean to be client-centered? Is it just about being a neutral listener, or is there a place for our partiality? And for Christians working in secular nonprofits, how do you navigate the desire to integrate your faith without violating professional boundaries? This is the Good Neighbor podcast with Jesse Sudirgo, and in this conversation, I'm joined by Aleke and Hector, Acero, Ferrer. We're going to dive deep into these questions, exploring our intentions, our methods, and how to find that crucial balance between sharing our truth and respecting the autonomy of those we're trying to help. Let's get into it. The reason why I asked you guys both on this podcast to talk about vocation and the social sectors, I think there's a lot of overlap in what you guys have done or thought at your thinking as well. But, I see, Aleke, you have a lot of experience in different contexts, both in a faith-based context and one in a non-faith-based context, that allows us to kind of wrestle with the question about how to figure out what does the word calling mean or vocation mean in our day? Like right now, working at Tyndale, we have found that a lot less people are, going towards pastoral ministry or want to serve in the church as much in the clergy capacity, or there's not as many priests who want to be coming into ministry in that way as well. So there's lots of different things happening right now where there's a shift towards those who might have wanted to. This is the theory right now, is that a lot of people who wanted to do that are now moving into a lot more things that have to do with health or wellness, right? There's a big push towards people who want to go into counseling or want to be a spiritual care practitioner in different ways. Some don't want in the faith at all, in the faith base at all, but more into counseling and therapy and all these different subjects that are emerging, which is it's a wonderful thing and it's booming. And the question that I wrestle with a lot that I love to kind of discuss with you guys is the way in which when someone originally who was going to be a pastor felt that sense of call and wanted to, devote their life and like, whether it's going to a mission field or going to whatever, that sense, how do you think that has evolved recently to how people treat it now? For those who want to go into a career that's not, in formally ministry, is there a different conception you think that there is right now of a sense of call? Has like professionalizing the social sector and these kind of work, has it changed the way we understand vocation? Or do you feel like it's just a different name, Like I really want to do this because I'm good at that and I want to go and get my major in it. Is that really just a different interpretation of calling, or would you call it something different? Curious your thoughts.
So when I was in the Netherlands and I was following my degree, MDiv pastoral, I became disillusioned with the church, and for several reasons. So I changed to educational, and so that might be part of that process. I think in the pastoral, you're often in a certain environment or a certain denomination or a certain church or a certain pastoral ministry that has restrictions in a certain way. And so do you want to adhere to that? Can you fit in there? And I felt like I didn't fit in the church anymore. The second thing I think that influenced me more was building relationships. And so it depends on the priority. Do I want to be a faith-based person in a faith-based environment, or do I want to be that presence in the world, and not in a strictly evangelistic way, but in a way where I can find out what the other is at. So I enter, instead of asking people to enter into my world, church, for example, can I enter into their world and then bring what I believe in? Now, the struggle is, of course, that when people are already in a place where you minister or you work, excuse me, where people are, they're seeking something. Now you're going out where people are not seeking anything at all. Often they're seeking, but you're finding out, what is your story? Where are you at? You have to be ready to not have expectations of the other. So you go in with the attitude of vocation in a way, or calling. I'm called to the people. I'm called to the person. I'm not called to changing you. I'm not called to get results necessarily. It's like when I worked at the drop-in, I would get a lot of students come in, and they'd say, what would it take to get a job here? And I would always say, I honestly don't care much about your education. But if a youth walks through that door, and for 7 years, 16 to 25, 9 years, 9 years, you work with them, and they leave and they haven't changed at all, and you have made no difference from your perspective, they haven't changed, will you still be there for them? That is calling.
That is calling.
That is calling is, I'll be there for you. I'm not result. It's not about what I achieve. It's not whatever. The other thing about the professionalism and that whole change is it a practical issue. The church is in the decline. And so it could be just the practical side. If I want to get a job, maybe I need to pursue.
If you want to make a living.
Yes. Maybe I need to pursue psychotherapy or any number of professions that are viable in this day and age. But for me, calling and vocation, you are drawn to it. It's not, there's a difference between job, calling, and vocation. A calling is something deeper. You do it because you have compassion for that other person. You have, yes.
Yeah.
You have that inner drive.
Yeah, there's something what you said about the no need for, in a way, results, is that like you can still kind of persist. There's a resilience, there's a fortitude, there is a sense of like continued commitment to it no matter what. I understand what you mean, because I think there's something about our economy today where the way in which we function in the economy is like, you exit when it stops to benefit, or you exit when it stops making profit, or you exit when things aren't going well and you're not, say in the social sector, making transformation that you expect. In a way, when people would say biblically, it's like, oh, we will know you by your fruit. Well, you know what? Sometimes, as we have seen in many contexts, in many stories that we've experienced at the drop-in center, like, you don't know that you don't see the fruit at all. But does it mean that we stop doing it, right?
Yes.
And I think that's a big thing, because why would I stay at a frontline position in an organization when I could be making more money climbing the ladder, when I'm actually really good in the front line? Say I was. I'm actually not. But like, if I really was good in the front line, why is it that I need to climb this, corporate ladder in that sense? But what do you feel like when you think
I want to add one more thing.
Yes, go ahead.
There are the metrics. So in my current job,
Yes,
there are metrics. You need to have the numbers. You need to have the certain achievements. So it's not just all hard. And yes, the climbing, yes, you have to choose that. I mean, I was offered higher positions, and I would say with the city of Toronto and in my current position, and I said I cannot be removed from the population because that's my calling.
Yeah.
So there is that, yes.
Mm.
But metrics are there, and they are, the numbers do count.
Are you saying that it's a good thing are you saying that's a?
I'm saying it is a driving factor that does help you, but it can't be the number. It's not the number one priority. It'll never carry you through if that's your number one priority.
Before you say anything. Well, in that case, right? Because
Yes.
when I think about that, what I've been thinking a lot lately is the fact that I say that too. Like I in working in the environment, in the social sector, there is a sense of desiring to hold two things at one time. This pure kind of love and this compassion and this drive. And like, it doesn't matter about the results, kind of feel that you were talking about. And then there's the metrics
Yeah.
that exist. And you know what? I'm very optimistic. I like to hold both of them all the time. And I kind of realized though, in our time, even just working together, that my desire to emerge this also can sometimes kill this, that the things that I thought that I was doing to create structure and accountability and all these measures of increased professionalization, I gotta say, when I reflect upon me trying to promote that more, there was also a sense of like killing something that was also alive and well.
Yeah.
And there's, so anyways, the only thing I push back in that is that like I feel there is an overestimation of man and humans' ability to be able to hold those two things together.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying there's no use for this, but there's something about that needs to be
There is.
thought out.
I'm glad I got to witness this interaction because it sparks a number of thoughts. The first one, and going back to your original question of like, what is a vocation or what is a calling? And we need to be very careful in how we interpret that, because in Christian circles, in faith circles, you tend to associate vocation with work that is exclusively ministry related or kind of healing related.
Yes.
And do I want to believe that an accountant doesn't have the vocation to be an accountant? No. I want to believe that an accountant could be purpose driven and have a vocation to be that and to serve the world through that practice, through that activity. Also because I do want to believe that everybody in their own way is hoping to kind of contribute to the transformation of the world, but that's a separate story. So understanding vocation, giving it a broader context in which is not only vocation to kind of religious life and to serving in the social sector or to doing something that is kind of not related to profit. I think that's something we tend to export onto people or project onto realities when we come from a sector like ours, either education or social services, in which profit is an enemy, is already a problem.
Right.
So that's number one. Second part is a vocation or a calling connected to a result. And I don't know. I am again projecting my own Christianity onto the situation, in which it's about crisis, it's about suffering, it's about if you are seeking results, then the purpose is less pure. So when you have a metric, then the metric is already tainting the result. And I don't also necessarily think that is the only reality. I do feel that when we focus exclusively on the metric, then we lose sight of the mission, but not necessarily that the metric will occlude the mission because of its sheer existence.
Yeah.
Then the third part of all of these is changes in the world, and changes that specifically affect Christianity and Christian churches, and specifically in Canada, the fact that being connected to churches tends to be a liability when you're in the business of trying to bring healing or hope to people. I'm Roman Catholic, and I know what the Roman Catholic Church has done to people. So I know that I can't just cleanly arrive into a place and say, my work is in interfaith dialogue, and then come, oh, I'm a Roman Catholic, and now I'm all about dialogue. This is what we're doing. When the Roman Catholic Church has been less than ideal when it comes to dialogue, especially with the least favored people in given context. So in Canada, the indigenous population. So there is a liability connected to that. Therefore, that connection of ministry and healing is less evident because people tend to see, and at least within my denomination, identify priests and sisters, religious sisters, with residential schools. And you see those pictures of them visibly connected to that. And, there is a power to them. What are we left with having to reimagine, like what you were saying earlier, what it means to minister today, what it means to minister today as Christians in a world that is not only multicultural, but in a world that has been in many cases harmed by Christianity itself. I believe that Christianity has something to say today that is very timely, but I'm also aware that how we say it and the settings in which we say it really matter. And that leaves me with the sense of vocation being completely altered, because I may want my faith to inform my actions, but I also feel that I can't necessarily get that through. And I see my students having the exact same problem and the same question every day. Do I have an answer for any of that? No, but
You just raised the question. Well, in that, like, we were talking over dinner about the fact that, you as a spiritual care practitioner, you enter into a hospital room, and in a way you don't lead with spiritual. You don't lead with spiritual because there's so many things that you need to, all the layers that come with that. And I think that's an important question for us to wrestle with, is the fact that, like, the traditional sense of what that would look like is, oh, I'm called to do the ministry, which, and there's so many things that you said there. I have another thought on that first thing you said there, but I think there's all that needs to be considered when we're in that. The baggage is real. And I do, like, to indicate that I'm, when I'm with friends or whatnot in a certain context, there is a hesitancy to indicate like what I do and even what I teach sometimes, because it comes with a certain baggage, right, that we need to consider.
Yeah. So when I started my first unit with the clinical psychospiritual education, and you're in 1 week, and then they tell you, okay, go find some patients. And so I thought initially, I always had, because I'm the spiritual care practitioner clinician, that I have to get onto that topic. And that's exactly the hesitancy there, that I had to address that. I wasn't there. I was there because I had to fulfill my job, my description of my title of my, and then realizing it's not about that. It's about the other. And that reaching the other does not come with my expectations of how I should fulfill my job, because my title says spiritual. Spiritual, first of all, is a very intimidating term. People religious are used to a chaplain. Chaplain is to a religious. We don't use that. Spiritual might be associated with New Age or any other number of things. Or people might think they're dying because now the chaplain or spiritual care clinician is showing up on the number. Is this the last lights or
when Aleke comes,
and so, yes, to meet the other, what they're at, and to not make it about you at all. And so that was intimidating at first. And so when you say to identifying to others, when you're with a group of people, and then you tell them what you do, and then you go, oh my goodness, this is breaking a relationship because now they can't relate to me because they don't understand. And I had to struggle with that a lot. And I was really sad. Then I read the book by Pargament, Spiritually Integrated Psychotherapy. And he explains it very well that we're biopsychosocial spiritual beings.
Say that again.
Biopsychosocial spiritual beings. So biological or physical, psychological, and then there are social, and then there's spiritual. We all are, whether we acknowledge this or not. So when I walk into a room and introduce myself and they say, I'm not spiritual, I know we all have a spiritual element to it. Just because you don't name it or you can't access it, then, I have to leave it at that and continue from there. And all of a sudden, I became more confident that the fact that I am a Christian, even in the context of my job, when they ask me, they seldom do, because it's not about me, it's about them. They don't know where I'm coming from. That I felt more confident. I was embarrassed that it came so late in life. I've been a Christian all my life. That we are all that. We are all, and it looks different for me than it does for you, depending on your spirituality. But I can be as confident about my spirituality as you are about your non-spirituality, as you would call it, or being an atheist or whatever. And then we can share that. But to me, too, it used to be a real barrier. And I would sometimes, especially when I was in Amsterdam doing outreach works in clubs and dance clubs and whatever, that they would ask that and I would have this hesitancy. And I think having gone through that education or awareness of being able to enter a room and to realize we're all on the same level, we all have a spiritual side. And then to enter into what does that look like for you? And I'm going to be accepting of what you think, believe, or are. And then you will be accepting because I show your respect to where you're at. And then if you're so interested in what I'm at, then there is that mutual respect. And I think that made me very comfortable with who I am. And also comfortable with who they are. So that does require a complete acceptance of the other, which is very difficult because we all come with bias.
That's right.
And we all have ideas. So I can never be completely, but yet in my role, I have to, show that I'm accepting. Now, whether they read my body language, whether they can see a hesitancy or whatever, yes, of course, there's always going to be a time where that will be. But I have grown in my role to try and at least hide the bias until I can deal with it afterwards and realize you had some things coming up for you. How do I deal with what came up for me during this visit?
Yeah, I know, Hector, you talk about in your classes about intersectionality as a core point in how to navigate this. I find that they say, put yourself in another person's shoe. And I remember in learning in philosophy, there's certain philosophical thought that says that, it's actually impossible. You can tell us more about this, Hector, but it's impossible to actually put yourself in someone else's shoe. Once you're in their shoe, it'll fit different. There's so many different things that you have to acknowledge is actually not actually happening, and there's a tendency to have a focus on a client-centered focus or whatnot, where it's you truly believe you can, and I'm curious how you think about that when it comes to helping your students work through it, because you have all the answers.
Do I ever? No, I again, inspired by what the conversation you were having at the beginning around the young street mission, the youth, and the change or not. Is that sense of that realization that kind of what you expect of the other person is not met. That you're putting in when you're meeting someone, you're not only trying to understand who they are, but you're placing on them all these expectations. And when you're serving them, you're putting expectations of change.
That they will change.
Yes, that they will change. And then you will change, the situation will change. There are all these things around that, but particularly that the person will improvement, the measurement comes back to haunt us here. But it is that idea of, because if I were in your situation, I will improve. I'm dealing with this person, this young person in this situation. If I were giving those tools that you're being given right now, I would improve. So is you've realized you've been in that situation where no, it doesn't work that way. So it maybe that philosophical theory has been proven here that we can't really be in each other's shoes entirely. So there is there is a limit to what we can bring to the other
Yeah.
person. I think that gets exponentially increased when we're talking about spirituality, because that's one of those markers of that intersectional identity that is the most obscure. Race, like you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it. Spirituality can be hidden, like a lot, and people. The modern world is set up in a way that, and part of it because of Christian Protestantism, and part of it because of North American consumerism, and part of it then is set up in a way in which your spirituality gets really buried within you, and you're either ashamed of realizing that you have it, or ashamed of saying something about it, or to practice it. But I agree with you. I think we all have it within. And going back to the question about what happens with the students, some of the undergrad students I deal with, most of the class that I teach them, and this is not intersectionality, this is just about general philosophical and theological questions, is to just make them realize that they have an orienting principle no matter who they are, and that is a spirituality that some of them have something that is established by faith tradition. So there are some outline principles that you can read in a book or go to church and practice. But for some others, it's something much more passive, but still influences them. I give students a lot the example of the gym, because going to the gym is a big practice now. I tell them how much of a religious practice that is, if wanting to improve yourself, shaping your life around that, connecting that to health, to wellness, to a way of being in the world. That is a spirituality. Is not equivalent to me to this kind of spirituality that can allow you to live an existing community, but it is there. So the moment that all the students realize, oh, doesn't matter what my tradition is or my lack of tradition is, I have a direction, a sense of direction. I'm putting onto my own life a direction of a beyond, of a future that is different, that is better, and that comes with its biases, its norms. Is that moment is the moment that you're describing? Of that moment they realize, oh, my bias is encountering your bias, and we can just sit in each other's presence and realize we could have a relationship across spiritual boundaries. Does that resolve the whole problem? No, but it's the first step.
Yes.
Sometimes it happens at the end of one's life. Most times it happens at the end of one's life.
And you deal with a lot of that end of your life.
And that is very interesting. I remember when my supervisor said to me, there was a certain visit I had, and he said, well, can you not accept that soccer is that patient spirituality? And I was sitting there like, pardon me? It's their sacred core, that what life is lived for. But you're very right, Hector. At the end of life, people have huge questions. And then they come to the question, is my sacred big enough? Can it handle
Can soccer?
death? Yes.
Can soccer handle that?
If it's in the gym and I get an accident and I can no longer work out, if it is a person and the person betrays you, so is my, whatever I've chosen to be the sacred core and the sacred, that's what I built my life upon, is it big enough? And so that's when, yes, at the end of life, people that were faithful all their life. I met a lady, devoted churchgoer, and she said, is it really true? Huge doubts on the one hand. A gentleman who had started a church, his wife said, oh my goodness, he's wondering, he was at death's door. He's now wondering whether he's good enough and whether his faith is strong enough. And it only took a few questions to say, what did you believe? what did you build your faith on? And I read him a few passages and he had it back. She said the next day, you just reassured him. On the other hand, when people haven't believed in anything, I met a patient that I've been off and on with for 2 years. And, the first time he said, why are you here? I'm not spiritual. And
Sorry, why the what? Sorry. No.
not spiritual. And then built a relationship where he came to ask, because death drew closer.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about religion. And then he talked about something else. And every time I said, tell me about religion, until one time I said, should I say a prayer? And how do you want me to address whatever your higher power is? Because I want to respect what you would call that if you would. And he said, yes, please do say a prayer. So, yes, it's an evolving thing, isn't it? My spirituality, my Christian faith has evolved. And so if it doesn't change, then it's become static and you go backward. So it's different in the stages of life and where you're at. And yes, and can we meet that person if they're in those, I have to think of Fowler's 6 stages of faith where you go, at some point you start to question everything and we consider that going backwards. And it's going forwards because now we're building and we're making it our own. Yes.
Yeah, I when I'm hearing this and just kind of relating it back to our thought about vocation and calling is, for me, the things that I grew up with when I thought about calling and that is the moments where I felt like certain about something. Okay, like I felt absolutely this is the direction. Everyone needs to know about it, or they're gonna be missing out. Like it actually has that. And by the way, I think there's an assumption, a cultural assumption behind certainty and all these different things. By the way, it's not, that's not commonplace that everyone desires that amount of certainty. But anyways, in my cultural understanding, growing up here in Toronto, that's what helped define vocation for me. The certainty of something. Like for example, growing up in my 20s, it was like I need to go to unreached people groups who've never heard about Jesus. It was certain in that mindset, and under that, it's an interesting thing to bring that my personal maybe what I grew up with understanding of that in conversation with like what you're talking about here with regards to suspending in a way my certainty, okay, and allowing another person's roaming in what they're ruminating, and actually be honest and genuine and authentic with the absolute, like, I know, I feel, okay, I'm not saying I do, okay, but I know, and meanwhile being with somebody and holding that. I'm curious, how would you approach that? I think it's a very hard thing, and I had this battle out with one of my friends. He's in indigenous spirituality, and he's like, why do you need certainty so much? Like why is it that you feel the need? And I'm like, I'm not trying to dominate over someone. Okay, this is when in our conversations. But when you feel strongly about something, you desire to persuade, like you desire to convince. And he really challenged me. I had to really search myself in understanding is like, what compels you to have to do that? Because in his understanding in indigenous spirituality, they don't have, even though they can be certain about something, don't have quite the impetus and the desire to convince or to persuade as much. And I don't know, that was a weird thing for me to wrestle with, and I didn't fully land on, but I thought that's an interesting thing. How do you deal with that?
Just something quick, and it comes up a lot in the context of the intersectionality class is how North American, a lot of, the situatedness of a lot of those drives and desires and impulses. I in coming to Canada, I've arrived here 20 years ago, so I'm really half Canadian, half Colombian at this point. But I remember how constraining it was for me to enter into a meeting space, because meetings in the North American setting are set up so an agreement is reached. So you go into a board meeting so that there is agreement. So that space for doubt and disagreement and controversy and uh, is
Mm.
killed
Yeah.
by the conversation. And I came from a world in which conversation is supposed to do the opposite. Conversation is about like, you like yell at each other and they discuss whatever you have in mind. You walk away from each other knowing that you are in full disagreement and still can love each other in that.
loving each other. Yeah.
And not hugging each other all the time. You fight.
Yeah.
But it is part of the expectation is not to convince, is not to agree. So there is a cultural element to that. But come back to the point of vocation, I do think that there is something about an extra layer of what happens in vocations to ministry or to service in the framework that we are developing here, that has to do with developing a new language. And just hearing your story, you not only have to do the service of providing spiritual support, but you also first need to develop a language that allows you to encounter the spirituality of the other person where it is. And I'm not sure that the spaces that form us here as ministers or frontline workers or equip us with what we need to develop that language. That is such a big task. You're paralyzed by the fact that you can't communicate with the other person. You can't listen to what they say, really. You can't really, what you say, is not getting across. So you need to do this meta-analysis, a philosophical analysis of, oh, what is the alternative language that will work here? And again, because spirituality is always hidden, culturally we don't have the elements to think about that language quickly. We don't. How many spaces have you been in, like out there in real life, that allow you to ask those big questions and to have a conversation with co-workers about it? How many spaces have you encountered where you can be having a drink and entertain a big, meaningful question without people feeling that that's a way of trespassing?
Yes. Yes.
And etc. So that
Yeah.
kind of like those spaces are so reduced that developing that language is such an enormous task. And outside of churches, it happens. It's much more difficult because at least within the church there is an agreement on we share there is some commonality.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you don't know who is on the other side of it.
So my supervisor told me one time, ask the obvious. And I think that's what often is lacking, is when they ask the other, how do you want me to address this? Like, say, for example, if I have to pray with someone, if they accept a prayer, to ask, how do you want me to address whatever you believe in? That could be the universe, that could be whatever. Then, of course, your own, and that's how this huge question comes up in me. And sometimes there's this guilt feeling. Am I betraying who I believe in as a Christian by starting to pray to something else or whatever? And but in the end I go, I am not God. I am here for the other. I'm not here and I can't convince others of what they should or shouldn't believe. And do I even know what that is? And there are barriers, yes, you have to overcome because of that faith that is instilled in you and the interpretation of how you believe and what I believe is right or wrong. And yet, for the sake of the other, to learn that language and to cross those boundaries, even though it goes over your boundaries. Is that a struggle? Yes. Does that bring up questions in me? Yes. Is it effective? Very. Because you create a trust which creates a longer relationship. And sometimes I only see people once or twice, in which you enter and re-enter. I do remember in Amsterdam, I met a girl, she was a Gothic. We met her in one of the dance clubs. And she said, "You're the first kind of Christian I can actually swallow and spend time with." Because there was that more accepting, trying to enter into her space. And you feel guilty sometimes, like, well, at some point, shouldn't I bring it up? Shouldn't I raise the issue? I mean, after all, this is my work, was there we were with an evangelistic organization. And yet the holding off, because people know, they read you, they somehow feel, and this is the power of faith, they know that they read you. And so words, we think that words are so important, or language, and sometimes it totally isn't. Sometimes it's the caring element, and I'm willing to speak your language, I'm willing to go where you are, even though that might grind with who I am. And that creates in them an openness, because they're still reading me. People know what's at your core. And I've had people say to me, I know why you're doing this.
Yeah.
But never having said a word.
Yeah.
And so, yes, do we have the trust that there is a higher power for me than God at work? Because God is God and I don't have to be God. I don't have to make the decision.
Yeah, I think of, it's funny how it's going to, like, talking about evangelism in some way in our conversation here. But at the same time, it's like what we kind of started with is also the idea of like healing, like fixing somebody, like the idea of like fixing somebody. I know what's right for you. And then engaging them with a direction for transformation or whatnot. That's also in part of this conversation. I wanna just talk about that. And when I talk about the certainty that we have, when we're convinced of something and we throw our whole life into something like that, I think the idea of like how it is to have such strong conviction about things. How do you hold such strong convictions while allowing for that passing, and is kind of at the heart of it. Because I think too, and you guys have already answered some of that, but I think what it is that it's important for us to kind of conceive of the way in which we understand our own self in being secure with things. There's something about, like, back to Rick Tobias, who is a common mentor at the Young Stream Mission. He summed it up with regards to sense of security, like not being insecure. There's like an insecure version of how you propagate your truth or your way or whatnot. And there's a insecure version and there's a secure one. And the secure one just knows, like it just knows it is right. And when you know, it's just like how at the drop-in center, the more someone chirps, the more someone talks a big game, the more they're not gonna fight, because they wanna scare you away with their yelling. That in the end of the day, you don't actually put up a fight, and we can tell that. But the people who are the most dangerous are the people who stay quiet, and then you wait, and then suddenly, bam, like something big happens in that situation. And I feel like that is the case sometimes when it comes to our interactions in the front lines or whatnot. When you are secure, a sense of security with the truth of what you know or you feel, or the direction that is the right path for someone who's in addiction or whatnot, or going through a hard time, it allows the room for people to move and express themselves in a way that is not coerced, because you just know it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
They will find a way, and maybe not exactly what I am, but there's something that I can stand in. I'm not sure if that connects with you, but that's what's coming to my mind when you're thinking that.
Just a quick comment about that, because it does have to do a lot with the discussion around kind of intersectionality, which is about how race and class and gender and sexual orientation and all of that situate you in the world. Like they place you in a very specific spot and not everywhere. So there is certainty, and then there is certainty. And I think that what we are fighting now is the idea that not that certainty needs to be eliminated, but that capital C certainty then indicates that my answer is the right answer to this problem in any kind of situation for any person, that certainty needs to be eliminated. And you said something really beautiful at the beginning. You cannot not know the problem and the solution until you really see the person in front of you. Is there is a specificity to the kinds of answers we're getting now, and what society is telling us with all this diversity is there isn't really a universal answer for those problems. You can have your universal truth sustain you and ground you and make you move forward, but you still need to assess who is in front of you on the basis of that specific interaction. And it is not holding in tension certainty and uncertainty. It is holding in tension that profound certainty that grounds you in your work and the specificity of the answers that we get to the problems that we currently have. And this all has to do with, the idea of the Western man, the Western, there are all these qualifiers to it in the intersectionality, the Western white, straight man who has the neutral universal voice. Like that's a lot in philosophy. I study philosophy, so it is all those philosophers, male, you see them with a big beard, they are the ones that have the answer. When you read them, you read an opinion that is valid across generations, across places,
Feels like that.
and it feels that way. But what we are being told now, what we're realizing with voices that are coming from all other places in the world is, well, guess what? That wasn't a universal answer because it doesn't work for us here, because it hasn't worked for women, because it was. So if we're going to include other voices, it means that those certain things need to be situated. That when I speak, I need to still speak from a very specific place, and that shouldn't shake me. That I should still be that strong person that witnesses to a truth that we believe transcends the world we exist in. But you have a better way of putting it all, which is that how that encounter really shifts, not who you are, but the approach.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm taking that away with me.
Yes. And that I think it's because you're from the everyday, daily basis, you're with people. So every day I meet different people in different circumstances, and you're always going in with fear and trembling. What am I going to meet now? And it helps. And it's that practical aspect of doing the work then on the ground and seeing a different scenario develop in front of your eyes every single time. And I can't connect or make a relationship if I don't see the person for who they're at and park myself on the side. So my certainty becomes completely irrelevant. And that's where I make connections, and that's where my job depends on it, of course. That's my job.
But the question is, can it be
That
completely inconsequential? Like in truth, you know what I mean? Like in reality.
no, not,
I mean, I know we're supposed to have
Yes.
that stoic kind of.
so that I think the difference comes in you're self-aware, you know it's happening,
Yeah. Okay.
and then you need to cross that barrier immediately or you lose relationship. No, it's not possible. But if I want to have what we call safe, effective use of self in my relationship, I don't feel safe if I make my presuppositions, biases obvious.
Yeah.
And I become ineffective in creating a relationship.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about different people who have taken a social work degree, right, or gone to become a therapist or working in jails right now or whatnot. I'm imagining people who have just decided to take a secular route in their education and get a professional job. Wonderful. And I'm sensing there's a lot of people who desire to bring in their some kind of theology or some kind of spirituality into that world, but don't know how to do that because there's a lot of boundaries, right, that we shouldn't imposed into those places. And so it's either like it used to be, where there used to be a bunch of people who go to like a seminary, become a youth pastor or whatnot, and go into a youth pastor kind of degree, and then go into some kind of social work with some of that backing. But a lot of people now don't have that backing of that. Maybe they go to church and they learn about different things, but they don't know how to include that in it. Now the question is like, should that be possible to do that, or should it only be when you like state I'm a Christian counselor, you know, or should it only be in places that are Christian nonprofits in which that can be expressed in a way that isn't, isn't unethical, right? Like, how does that function? The integration of spirituality and a theological, it being formed theologically into those contexts. How do you think about that? And what would you say to someone who is like thinking about the way in which to merge those, or whether they should just keep them separate and just pray in secret while they do their practice,
I think that that has to do with an even deeper question of should they have been separated in the first place. If you think about the people that are served through those programs, even the people at churches that are simply being ministered to by a pastor, their lives are not fragmented. Like their spirituality is in no need of being integrated in the rest of their lives. Is woven into who they are. And then going back to your point about professionalization of care, is we are creating these categories of like, we serve you as a spiritual care person or as a social worker, and this is the neighborhood that I can deal with, and that's okay. It's okay. Someone is trained in something to serve well in that specific area or industry. But the reality is that spiritual questions run through it all. So, I teach I teach at Laurier, and that program in Martin Luther University College that I predominantly have students from is spiritual care and psychotherapy, and is partly an institutional effort to recognize that those two are integrated. And I do believe that institutionally we're late in the game. That students are already coming in with the sense of, oh, I cannot be only a psychotherapist. I realize already through my practicum or through that people in front of me have both psychological and spiritual questions that cannot be fragmented from one another. So, regulations and all of that still exist, but I do think that the greater reality that is in front of us is that we are now having to deal with all of that being intertwined and being dealt with as a whole. And all these new talk about wellness and bringing Eastern spirituality to speak to realities here is a way of new generations calling us to account for not being able to respond to the spiritual needs that are connected to the rest of their lives.
I mean, like for you, Aleke, you've been in multiple organizations, both in faith-based and ones not right now. Like, how would you describe the different ways in which you showed up in those contexts? Do you feel like there was a big shift in being in a hospital, for example, and expressing that?
It's I think, first of all, that was very well said. You bring your theology with you no matter what. Whether you're defensive about your theology, whether you're afraid to bring it up, whether you feel pressured yourself that you need to bring it up, that's a whole other question. That's a personal issue. When I was at the addiction treatment center, it was from the Salvation Army, and I was the chaplain there. I understood that most attendees weren't faith-based, and they were seeking for, because you need a higher power with the 12-step, the higher power. And then I had one gentleman who said to me, I have 4 generations of no spirituality. I want to be a spiritual person. What should I choose? Very big question. So I looked up a whole bunch of things, because he said, but I don't want religion. That was the stipulation. So I started to teach what is spirituality, and I went through, the whole book of, I taught a lot about what it is, so that they would have a chance to choose. When I worked for the city of Toronto, I remember, I think your whole being brings it with you. People, and still, I was with a patient the other day who said, I like your vibe. They feel it. They know it.
You got a vibe.
And so it's a very interesting. He said, hold my hand. And she was something with the universe, and I don't know exactly. She was rather confused and was partly in delirium. But they feel it. They know it. Now, whether I want to choose to put words to that or how far I want to implement it, or what satisfies my standard as to how I need to implement. If I'm a social worker and I work in a secular environment, I think it mostly has to do with the pressure we do on ourselves, because we bring our theology, we bring our whole self in there. I think the fear of that we're afraid we're not bringing it paralyzes us and makes us unnatural.
Yeah.
Yes.
Comes out awkward.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the biggest factor that exists. I remember I was at the city of Toronto, let me finish that story, and there was a lady who had crossed, she came in crying, and she's standing in front of the counter, and snot is literally dripping on the counter while she's crying. She said, I was going to cross the road, addiction problem, and I realized all of a sudden I couldn't make it, and the car was coming, and I ran back. And he said, the guy got out of the car and he slapped me in my face because now he had to stop because she didn't run across and he didn't know whether. And she said, and I'm just listening to a story and I'm just standing there. And I realized, Aleke, your heart has become hardened. You've met too many scenarios which are extreme.
Yeah.
And so I went home that night and I realized I had left my theology behind. Because your exposure to too much and too often and to whatever. And so, yes, you always bring it. And you'll know when you're not bringing it. So it's always there. But whether you choose to access it and how you used to use it and the pressures, and that's something we need to deal with and be very honest and open with ourselves. And always question ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just gonna say I couldn't agree more. And we're whatever the work we are doing can be our theology, our sense of orientation, of ultimate direction is coming with us. For me, the hallmark of good theological education is bring awareness to the fact that that is there, and bring some sort of language for us to be able to communicate it in a way that is not violent. People might benefit from what you have to say theologically, but there is a difference between that and having that pressure of converting the other person. So there is so much there, but it really is. It's being aware that you're bringing it. It's and you meet people that are in a state of great vulnerability. So they are much more vulnerable to who you are and to your theology. Your sense of orientation is driving you, therefore is driving them. Being aware that you're doing that is what can shift the power in that relationship and allow the person to maybe heal in a different way or respond to the situation in a different way. But yes, like that's, bringing always your theology with you. It is there. It is, and and the more you suppress it or deny it, the more it finds ways to come out. And what happens when you deny something, the opportunity to be expressed. It gets
so
expressed
weird.
in the
Yeah,
worst
and
possible
I
way.
think the reason, if I'm a institution that is a not faith-based institution, in a way, I'm going to put my boundaries in place because of how many times it has come out awkward. How many times, like, the inability to communicate theology in a way that doesn't cause violence has happened so many times that you're like, let's just not do it at all, right? And so there is a self censoring, but also there is organizations who just don't know how to allow for it to exist because there's just so many examples of it not going well, right? And in a way, it is, some could argue, an overcorrection, but also on the side of those who, if we're helping to build people into this kind of a matured version of how to express your own theology in contexts that are, not faith-based, then it's important to like train people in that mindset, to know how to do it without violence, to know how to allow for that. So, and hopefully, organizations can allow for a little bit more without having, in your situation, you're a spiritual care practitioner, so there's a little bit more ability in that. But in other places, like, it's not allowed at all, like in bringing that, right? And so I think we have to reckon with that, as institutions need to understand how to be a little bit more nuanced for allowing that, and to judge a worker based on their maturity and how they handle that, and those who don't. And maybe just don't let them because it's not mature enough, like in its expression. I think there needs to be some like layers to that rather than, sweeping policies for that. But I think it's both ways: internal understanding of why we stop from that, and then organizationally, how we understand that. Yeah, do you guys have any like final thoughts or like things that you're thinking as we're closing today? Especially like a lot of people who are listening who might be thinking about this a little bit more, like, how are you landing in our conversation? I got a lot there. For me, the thing that stuck with me is the understanding of is you're sacred enough. What you were saying there, Aleke, about people at the end of their life coming to terms with that was a big thing for me to kind of reckon with and understand. But
yes, and I think that something that you said, Hector, is your sacred big enough, but are you secure enough in that so that you don't get on the defensive and become violent? That was, yes. Yeah.
Oh, for me, just hearing, you're carrying always your theology with you. I'm going to use that with my students.
make sure you cite.
Yeah, I was like,
Cite Aleke and Dekker.
date. We were written that. No, is that thought, but connected to, you want to speak to Jesse here with this podcast. You want to speak to people that may be considering a vocation, and whether all the limitations of the world are somehow asphyxiating the sense of vocation, which is a reality. But I do think that there is hope in finding new ways of serving, that organizations are thinking twice about all of that. That yes, there are regulations, yes, there are all of these parameters and boundaries and disciplinary boundaries, industry boundaries that need to be abided by, but more so than ever. And, we owe this to the new generations, to the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, who are always talking about, like, those bigger anxieties about the world. So they are bringing spirituality back to the forefront, and we are going to have to respond to it. So I do have hope that we're moving in a more positive direction.
And I think the word you use is reimagining. I think vocation, reimagining calling in this day as you bump up against walls and barriers and whatnot. The reimagining helps to break through those or go over it or whatnot. There's something about that we need to consider, which I don't think we answered all those questions today, but I think it's a great start in thinking about this. So thank you for joining me today in talking about this, and it's great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. It's great.